little section. So now we'll go ahead and connect. I don't have a battery plugged in, so let me plug in a battery here real quick. And this I didn't expect to find the first time I use it, so we'll just do it a quick shout out. Oftentimes in our older days of using the VLHeli suite or the application that we would download, you could use that to spin your motors. Of course, we can do that in our flight controller firmware, EmuFlight, Betaflight, what have you. It has that in there as well. But if you're in here tinkering and you want to double check your motor rotation to make sure it's going the way you want it to, you can do that right here. And I'll just spin this up. Hopefully you can hear my motors, they're winding. And you can also do them one at a time as well. So that's a nice little feature. Let's go deeper into the ESC. We'll click Green Setup. It comes up here, and you see already that I have got the BlueJay version 0.12, and I'm running 48 kilohertz. So in my case, I don't need to flash it, but for the purposes of this tutorial, we'll go ahead and do the flash all. We see we have BlueJay, as well as we can go back to VLHeli, the old VLHeli. Make sure your ESC is detected properly, and make sure that it's compatible, I guess, because sometimes this can come up wrong. I haven't seen it hardly more than once or twice, but if you're having ESC problems, I can see where it might not detect the right version for your ESC. You'll need to check with the ESC vendor on which one it is titled as. And then we have the version. See, the first time I did this, it was on test 1. It's already test 2. And then we can select our frequency. This is where on the ESC page we see kilohertz. Typically for me, when I'm flying inside, I leave it at 24, 48 on micromotors, like the ones I've got here, the 0802, 22,000 kV. It can give you a little bit more flight time, but it also slows the prop down slower. So if you need to make rough changes and you're not used to that slight difference, it could have an impact on your flight. But I'm going to go ahead and put 48 on here. And then we click the flash all. We go back to this screen and we see the progress bars. I'm going to speed up this section of the flashing. Just know that it goes from one ESC to the next ESC until it's finished. Okay, we're all done with the flashing. If you want the tones that you put in to be louder, pump this up a little bit. I'll go ahead and put it at 106 there. And we have to go down here to where it says Open Melody Editor. And this is where I have something that the veterans might be of use. ESCtunes.com, it was a site I'd stumbled upon. If we go back into the home page here, we can see that SchizoDuck created this site, and at one point in time he had planned to make it, a paid service. I think the paid service is tied to building the hex file to flash. We don't really need to do that anymore. Maybe that's why it didn't finish. I noticed the building of the hex file didn't work. I also did contact SchizoDuck and asked him about this site and the fact that I really enjoyed the library. It's got a great library in it, but it doesn't seem like the site's finished. SchizoDuck did not get back to me. SchizoDuck, if you're out there, great work so far. Appreciate your library. Awesome. But it doesn't seem that the paywall or the $1 fee is actually enabled, because you can see we've got a logout button here and it doesn't do anything. If you hover over the Get Started button, there's no getting started. It's just dead. It says coming soon. Don't know how long it's been that way. But I'm going to click the back button to go into the page of the tunes that I wanted to look at. So it's got a lot. You can see across the top here, we've got 0 all the way through Z, and it's got pages and pages. You can see my scroll bar here over on the side. There's a lot there. And one of the ones that's most popular is the Imperial March, of course. So if we click the little triangle for play on that. Oh, I should have clicked this one then. Sorry. So hopefully you've heard that play a little bit. Now we need to take the code. That's what we need for our melody in BlueJay. So I'm going to copy the section of the code after the colon. So if I go all the way forward here, you can see I'm leaving all the title, and I'm just capturing what comes after the code. And I'm going over to the ESC configurator, and I'm going to copy that in. And I'm going to leave melody and its colon in place. And you can see this is red. Now this is why I wanted to bring it up. This will not play, and it will not allow you to accept. Well, it'll play, but it won't allow you to write this to your ESC. It's too long. So there must be a character limit or something going on there. So if you chop this part out, you can see we can play it. And it plays. And then you can click accept. and then you click Write Melodies. And it's done. So now, if I disconnect, hopefully you can hear it over my microphone. It doesn't always capture this stuff. Okay, so that's how you do it in the ESC configurator. Let's go back into Read Setup. And very similar to what you've seen before, make sure you do your version, and then you select your frequency, and then you click this button once it's enabled. I'm not going to do that again. You've already seen that once on the ESC-configurator site. But if you want to edit via this, you click that little button for Show Melody Edit Kilohertz. So in my case, I don't need to flash it, but for the purposes of this tutorial, we'll go ahead and do the flash all. We see we have BlueJ, as well as we can go back to BL Heli, the old BL Heli. Make sure your ESC is detected properly, and make sure that it's, compatible, I guess, because sometimes this can come up wrong. I haven't seen it hardly more than once or twice, but if you're having ESC problems, I can see where it might not detect the right version for your ESC. You'll need to check with the ESC vendor on which one it is titled as. And then we have the version. See, the first time I did this, it was on test 1. It's already at test 2. And then we can select our frequency. This is where on the ESC page we see kilohertz. Typically for me, when I'm flying inside, I leave it at 24. 48 on micromotors, like the ones I've got here, the 0802, 22,000 kV. It can give you a little bit more flight time, but it also slows the prop down slower. So if you need to make abrupt changes and you're not used to that slight difference, it could have an impact on your flight. But I'm going to go ahead and put 48 on here. Then we click the flash all, we go back to this screen and we see the progress bars. I'm going to speed up this section of the flashing. Just know that it goes from one ESC to the next ESC until it's finished. Okay, we're all done with the flashing. If you want the tones that you put in to be louder, pump this up a little bit. I'll go ahead and put it at 106 there. And we have to go down here to where it says Open Melody Editor. And this is where I have something that the veterans might be of use. ESCtunes.com, it was a site I'd stumbled upon. If we go back into the home page here, we can see that SchizoDuck created this site, and at one point in time he had planned to make it, a paid service. I think the paid service is tied to building the hex file to flash. We don't really need to do that anymore. Maybe that's why it didn't finish. I noticed the building of the hex file didn't work. I also did contact SchizoDuck and asked him about this site and the fact that I really enjoyed the library. It's got a great library in it, but it doesn't seem like the site's finished. SchizoDuck did not get back to me. SchizoDuck, if you're out there, great work so far. Appreciate your library. Awesome. But it doesn't seem that the...
Alright guys, this is a tutorial video on how to flash your BL Heli S ESCs with BlueJ firmware. So BlueJ firmware is new ESC software that came out recently. It's still experimental. I think it's like version 0.12 at the time of this video. And for those of you guys who have been following me on Instagram and are like crazy to find out how to make your ESCs play those different tunes and music and stuff like that, I'll get to that here at the end of the video. So just hang on, just want to get through a little of the sort of the technicals first. So for those of you guys that want to use RPM filter on BL Heli S ESCs, you pretty much were limited to either Jazz Maverick firmware or JESC, and that was, I think, was paid. You had to pay for those. I had to get a license. Now, I've pretty much been using just the Jazz Maverick firmware up to 16.9, and it seems that development has stopped on that. I'm not really sure why, but it was working for me. I've heard some stories of people having, burned DSCs and other problems, desyncing issues. I have Jazz Maverick firmware, probably close to 100 quads by now that I've tried, and I haven't had any of those problems, so I'm not really sure what people are doing wrong. They're set up to have that issue. I did a video like a year ago on how to set up RPM filter and all that. All that stuff still applies here. This is just going to be how to get the BlueJ firmware on to the ESCs. And again, just saying this is experimental. There could still be problems. I haven't really done a lot of testing on this. I put this on maybe 5 quads so far, mainly just to get the music stuff on the ESCs because I wanted to post that stuff to Instagram. I have been flying a little bit. So far, no problems, and it seems okay. And then this does seem to be a little bit more advanced than the Jazz Maverick firmware. It does have a little bit more fine-tuning ability in terms of like ramp-up power and startup power, that kind of thing. I'll explain that here in a second, the configuration interface. With that being said, use this with caution, and if you have problems, would probably go to that page, this page I'm going to show you here in a second on the computer, and maybe contact the developer or go to some of the forums and see if someone can help you out. Because generally, as long as you get the right firmware in terms of Betaflight and you have the correct setup, and you're in Betaflight, it's not giving you any error percentages and the motor outputs when you're actually running the testing, then it should usually work. I haven't had any problems in this case. So if you have some sort of configuration issue, then yeah, this video is not going to cover that for you. There's a myriad of different things that can go wrong, and I could easily make a 4 or 5 hour video just on half of the possibilities. So I would try and make some inquiries in some of the forums if you come to run any problems on this BlueJ firmware. Okay, so that being said, let's get all the disclaimers out of the way. Go ahead to the computer, and I'll show you where to get it, software, and how to install it to your ESCs. Okay, so this is the web page we can go to get information on the BlueJ firmware, and this has some information on the current features and what version they're currently on. Has some, some information comparing it to VLHeli-S in terms of startup power, minimum startup power, maximum startup power, and RPM power. I'll explain it a little bit, from my understanding what it is in the configurator page, not here. You can read it here if you want, but this is where all the information is if you want to get more details. In terms of flashing the ESCs, you can either do it using this ESC configurator, which is actually browser-based, or you can use the BlueJ configurator, which is a standalone. It's kind of like a Chrome-based application you're probably familiar with. I'm going to actually demonstrate this on the browser-based ESC configurator, the first one listed here. If you want to get the standalone app for your computer, you can go here to this link, and it's another GitHub you can download here, and they have the configurator for Linux, macOS, and Windows. It looks like 1.35 is the latest version. But if you go to this website here, this link, it's called esc-configurator.com. You can it's actually browser-based, and assuming your USB ports are working properly and you have proper USB drivers on your computer, this should work. I haven't had any problems because all my PC stuff has been set up properly. But if you have problems connecting, it might be due to some sort of USB driver problems. So this video is not going to cover that. So we have the script for this video. It's probably something you want to search YouTube for in terms of like Windows drivers for USB ports and fixes for that kind of stuff. So I have a separate video on like how to fix USB driver problems for like I think it's like for Betaflight configurator. So it may work for this one as well. So I'll link that video down in the description if you want to start there. And from that point on, you can look for the videos having to do with Windows drivers, Windows USB drivers. Anyway, this is what I'm going to use. So go ahead and I'm going to connect up demo quad here. This is the Diatone Roma F3, I believe, and this has VLHeli-S firmware here. I believe it's got a version of Jazz Maverick firmware currently on here. Okay, so the computer has detected the correct USB port, and I just need power, so I'm going to power this on. And we'll go ahead and hit connect, and then hit read setup. Yeah, and it has Jazz Maverick firmware here at 16.9. And so to flash BlueJ firmware here, you just hit flash all down here. And you can actually choose other firmware. So if you want to choose VLHeli firmware, you can do that. But in this case, I'm going to choose BlueJ. It should auto detect the current target just GH30, leave that alone, and then you want to select your version in here. So you can go back to an older version if you want. I'm going to use the latest 0.12 test version. This is the one that also enables the music, which I'll show you at the end. Select that, and then you have to select the PWM frequency. So you can't set this as a setting as you can as with Jazz Maverick firmware. You can either basically have to select the frequency at flashing. So I'm going to select 40 kilohertz for this one, and we'll go ahead and flash everything. Okay, so it looks like it migrated some of the settings over, kept the actual motor direction for all the motors, so that's a good thing. And it tried to match the settings that were previously on the older firmware with this newer firmware. So there's some differences here. This minimum startup power and maximum startup power is something that I haven't seen before. So basically it has to do with when you first plug in and give power to the motors, when you give it throttle, how much actual power is being sent through the ESCs to the motor. And I found that these default settings seem to be just fine. But if you find that, for example, if you're giving it low throttle and you're gently increasing the throttle but the motors aren't spinning up, you might want to increase the minimum start value. And then the maximum start value is, I think, how much maximum power can be given to the motors at full throttle. And so if you're having a lot of issues where, for example, the motors you get a lot of noise or vibrations, maybe that this value might be too high. And this is actually kind of related to this other value down here called RPM power protection or ramp up. This is the rate at which the power is increased or decreased. So here the values go from 1 to 13. And basically 1 means more protection for the motors and 13 means less protection stemming. So what that means is if you are, for example, you have a quad that just has a lot of noise and vibrations even at like mid to low throttle, and it doesn't matter what you're doing with your B term or your pit tune, you may want to decrease this value because there's too much ramp up power being sent to the motors from the ESCs. So this tends to happen to occur on lighter builds. It seems like when the motor has a lot of power compared to the weight of the quad, all including the battery. On certain setups, doesn't happen on all of them, but on some that you may have more noise from that. So just bump it down from like 9, which is default, to maybe 6 or 5, and see how that feels. If you go down too low, what will happen is the motor won't have enough ramp up power, so it'll feel really sluggish and non-responsive. And if you feel that at the setting of 9, you want more ramp up power, then you probably want to increase that. That's going to be probably maybe things like Cinewhoops that are really heavy, and you want more control authority. Then maybe bump it up from 9 to like 10 or 11 and see how that feels. But generally speaking, I would just leave it alone unless you're having major problems with pit tuning. As long as you're not having major problems, I would just leave it alone. Okay, so that's about all I know about these settings here. You can ask in the forums if you need more information, but I think that should get you started. Now, for the thing about the music that everyone wants, so it's over here, down here, this button called the Open Melody Editor. So open that up. So there's like basically put a tune in here. You can actually play a different tune on every ESC if you want to, but I think that's kind of annoying because you won't be able to tell what's what. So I hit this button says this box says synchronize melodies, and then you just paste in your tune here. Now this is what's known as an RTTL format for a melody. So let me just go ahead. This is an X-Files melody that I found somewhere, and they're all over the internet in various places. So paste it in here, and then you can see here that it looks like it's too long. So these last two are highlighted, so you have to cut off these and then hit accept and then save. And then it'll save that to the ESC. So when I close this and then hit disconnect, it should start playing the tone. Okay, so if you're wondering how to find these melodies, just go to Google, was what I did. And so if you want to type in something like RTTL and then whatever the melody you're looking for. So like I had found a Gallagher tune, you can do that. And there's various websites and forums you can go to and find it. So it just has to be in that format. And it can't be too long, because too long it'll basically tell you you can't save it, because it only has enough space for a certain amount of data. So you basically, if the song's too long, you have to cut it shorter, or basically just cut off the last part of it, and it won't get saved to the ESC. And that's pretty much it. Obviously, I'm gonna probably get a lot of questions. Where can I find this? Or where can I find that? Like I said, just go to Google, do exactly what I did here. You're gonna have to probably Google a little bit Google. This is what I did. But yeah, you can probably find a lot out there. So there's, these are like old tunes from I think Nokia phones, I believe. That's or some older cell phones. And that's pretty much where you can get these tones from. I think they're ringtones, I think, pretty much what they are. Anyway, I hope this has been helpful in terms of getting you on the latest and greatest DLHeli-S ESC firmware. It's still pretty new, so there might be bugs. So be aware that, if you happen to have a desync of all the sky, you may want to go back to your whatever older firmware that you're using that will work for you. This is still experimental. So anyway, that's good for this video.
Hello and welcome to the video. This is a quick video about the fact that Express LRS 4.0 has finally been released. Actually came out at the weekend today as I'm recording this, but I'll actually release this on Tuesday because the weekend was already full of scheduled videos and things anyway. However, I've had a couple of you get in touch as soon as that thing was released, saying, can you cover the things that have changed about it and what is different? So I thought, yeah, cool, absolutely, let's go and cover that now. I don't like talking too much about stuff before it's been released, because I've been bitten before where things change before they actually make it into public domain. It's been a release candidate for a long time. It's been very heavily tested by lots and lots of pilots, so it's kind of fun to get our hands on it. And excitingly, Channel 5, that whole legacy thing about Express LRS, where Channel 5 has to be high, and it's a legacy from the early days of Express LRS, because let's be honest, it was developed for quad pilots, for Betaflight, and Express LRS has developed into the go-to for the hobby now, and it's been used for everything. Cars, boats, planes, wings, with or without flight controllers. So having that silly legacy Channel 5 thing has been a real pain in the butt. And I've talked about it historically, about stopping Express LRS being able to work nicely over S-Bus with things like legacy stabilizers, and some not so legacy ones actually, things like helicopters too. And occasionally the Express LRS devs do take a little bit of time to give us what we want. Another example would be S-Bus, but at this point, Express LRS 4.0 is almost giving us everything that we've been asking for since it really took hold as a project. So let me jump on the computer and go through the release notes, kind of give you the highlights. Again, all this stuff is available. You can read it yourself in lots more detail if you're interested. I'll put a link down below. So here we are in the release notes. All of this is available if you want to go and get into the weeds a little bit more about what has actually changed. There's a massive amount of work going into this, so a huge thank you to all the Express LRS developers for putting their time and effort into this, essentially for free. A couple of caveats before we get too far into this. Be aware that the support for STM32 based hardware has been removed. That means that all those people who were out there pioneering this with things like the FrSky R9M hardware and other bits and pieces, you know what? You're kind of going to have to stick with the versions that you are on. It looks like Express LRS 4.0 is leaving that legacy behind. So let's go through this in no particular order. I'm just going to go through it as it appears here. Actually, you know what? No, I'm not. I'm going to go through this one first. Channel 5. Now, historically, Channel 5 has needed to be in a high position in order to turn on all the goodness, dynamic power and other bits and pieces. And although you could turn those things off, lots of pilots, when they were using the Express LRS technology with older stabilizers over things like S-Bus, didn't really appreciate this and were getting lousy range and performance issues because channel 5 wasn't high. We now have the ability to move it to another physical or logical switch and put it on another channel. So if you are using an old style stabilizer, or maybe one of the OMP hobby modern stabilizers in your helicopter or whatever, going to 4.0 is finally going to fix that issue. You are still going to have an arming channel that could be logical, so that when you move the throttle off the very lowest position, it's armed or whatever you want to do. But now we have that flexibility. For me, I would probably just move it out of the way and put it on channel 11 or 12, and that way then I can use channel 5 for whatever gain mode or whatever it is on those pieces of older technology that need channel 5 to be something other than a binary position channel. The next one then that I'll talk about, and I'll kind of zoom down because it's kind of hidden at the bottom, but this is kind of big news. LR1121 has been it's the technology, the transceiver technology inside a lot of the modern radios. So things like the Radiomaster TX16S Mark III, things like the GX12, lots of modern radios are using this new technology. And with Express LRS 4.0, we actually get access to a new 20 packet modes. So this allows us to unlock all of the performance of those LR1121 based transceivers that are in these newer radios. So if you have one of these newer radios, you know what, it's probably worthwhile you're looking at potentially playing around with this, so that when you're playing with the different modes, then you get the maximum performance. But they're saying here that this is the whole reason that 4.0 needed to happen, but it's nowhere near the top of the list of things that they've changed, which I think is quite interesting. The next one to talk about then is automatic channel antenna modes. I've done videos about this in the past, about whether or not it's things like diversity, or whether it's Gemini mode, or all those other kind of different bits and pieces. It's confused a load of people. The cool thing is, as of 4.0, it's all going to automatically be selected between true diversity and Gemini mode based on the transmitter setting. It's all going to be set automatically. You don't have to mess around with this to try and figure out which mode you need on your radio for the particular receiver that you've got and how you've got it set up. Next one to talk about then is they have expanded the PWM receiver ranges. So if you are using PWM receivers in your car, boat, plane or whatever, you can now go the full range from 500 to 2500 microseconds to drive the servos to their maximum position, if that's been a problem for you historically. And they've also increased the failsafe a little bit outside that range by about 23 microseconds, from 476 to 2523. So that means that any servo-based craft, cars, boats, wings, planes, radio-controlled trucks, whatever it is, now gives you that little bit more latitude to drive the servo to the very extremes of its position. Next one to talk about then is the adaptive dynamic power. This is quite a nice change. There's actually a lot of changes inside 4.0 about how the communication happens between the radio and the receiver and vice versa, and how it uses that communication to improve the performance of the link. This is a nice one where it means that this majorly improves the power for things like the 1121 systems that I've already mentioned, which means that you're not going to be going to full blast output as often. It's a lot smarter in this new firmware for those adaptive dynamic power systems, so that it's not just turning on the tap all the time when it thinks there might be a problem. There is a new web user interface, so if you update your Express LRS configurator, you're going to look very different from the ones that we've had so far. Not necessarily a bad thing. It has been like that, well, since the very early days, and this will hopefully provide the format for them moving forward. So be ready for that when you update it. I'm going to be doing that in the next couple of days as I start to play with this in anger here. The other nice thing is there has improved telemetry rates. So whether you're operating in Gemini mode and you have multiple antennas, or whether it's a single antenna, there is an improvement in the telemetry bandwidth that we're getting back. Now this is big news. If you want to do things like get Mavlink telemetry back to the radio, or you're passing the telemetry back to some kind of ground station and trying to use it, I have been very disappointed historically with the telemetry bandwidth, and 4.0 addresses that. So it means that with Gemini mode, we're going to get a lot more, and even if you only have a single antenna, you're going to get about a 30% increase in bandwidth. So telemetry times are going to be reduced because the bandwidth has gone up. So if you are playing a lot with telemetry, this is fantastic news. The backpack has got a lot smarter as well. So it supports sending data to HTX instead. So that means that you could potentially use devices like this foot pedal to control stuff, which potentially opens the door to lots of rigs that you could have that are quite complicated that actually connect into the radio via the backpack and be used for control. That's a great idea. The next one is quite
what's this hype, Captain Bry? You can plug whatever you want, buddy. Captain Bry is my hero. Without going into excess detail, I recently brought Captain Bry, I brought him a challenge, something I was trying to do that I couldn't do. And Captain Bry, and again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but Captain Bry said, "Oh, that sounds easy. I got nothing to do tonight. I'll work on that for you." I was like, "Oh, yeah, thank you, sir. That's nice." And then he, like 20 minutes later, he said, oh, that's way harder than I thought it was. I'm so sorry. I know I said I would do that for you. I don't think I can do it. I'm not sure anybody can do it." And then the next morning, he said, "I couldn't go to sleep. I was like, I was thinking about it. And so I just banged out this thing, and I kind of thought it wouldn't work, but it kind of does work." And he just solved my problem, even though he said it was impossible. So Captain Bry, you can plug whatever you want on my channel. You're amazing. He wants to hype Express LRS 400 RC1. Express LRS 400 is coming. This has been the first major dot release. Express LRS has been in 3.x for a long time. And sadly, it is not cross-compatible with existing versions. That has always been true, that Express LRS major versions are compatibility breaking. So the first thing you need to know is, if you are like, I want to try Express LRS 4.0, you cannot bind it to your 3.x gear. You'll need to go all in. What's new? Support for STM32 based hardware has been removed. So basically all Express LRS hardware today uses the ESP32 chip. Way back when, it had support for STM32 chips, which let you install it on FreeSky R9 modules. So way back when, Express LRS didn't have any dedicated hardware. The firmware, you would download the firmware onto your FreeSky R9, or you would hand build your own hardware, but manufacturers weren't making it. And it commonly used the ESP32 or the STM32 chip, although the ESP32 chip has been the standard for a long time. That does mean, if you care about NDAA, that's funny. So the ESP32 chip is not allowed to be used on NDAA, National Defense Authorization hardware. That basically means hardware that doesn't have certain ties to China and other potentially hostile countries. So anything with an ESP32 chip in it cannot be NDAA compatible. So Express LRS is not NDAA compatible. Although there are manufacturers making NDAA Express LRS hardware, and they're doing it with STM32 chips. And so my guess is that those manufacturers will have to not use 4.0 or add the STM32 support back in order to continue to make NDAA compatible Express LRS stuff. Automatic antenna modes. Nice. It'll use Gemini when it's available and not when it's not. Alternative arming method. Doesn't use channel 5. Leaving channel 5 free. That's good. The alternative arming method works. I see. Oh, I like that. You just tell Express LRS what your arm switch is, as opposed to tying it to a specific channel. That's great. I love that. Interesting. Alright. I didn't realize that full res modes would skip channel 5. I don't use full res modes very often. I didn't know that. PW servo stretch mode. Oh. Wow. I mean, I'll never use that, but that's cool. D-Shot 3D mode. The Express LRS receiver can output a D-Shot 3D mode signal? Okay. I guess if you're driving a D-Shot ESC straight off an Express LRS receiver, that's interesting. Statistical adaptive dynamic power. Statistically models the SNR expected to result in 99% LQ and adjust power to achieve that. This improves dynamic power for the 1121 systems. Wow. The little K-pop Demon Hunters reference. That's good. So here's my thing with dynamic power. I hate seeing the LQ drop, go up. If you're using dynamic power, what I see is the LQ is 99, 95, 90, 80, 85, 82, 90, 9. And it drop. As it cranks the power up, the LQ drops and then boosts. And like, anytime I see the LQ dropping, I'm like, oh, and then it goes up, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm good to go. And then someday, it drops, and I'm already at max power, but I don't know that because I'm not paying attention, and then I just failsafe. So, I would love to see a dynamic algorithm, maybe this is that holds the LQ higher, so that anytime I see the LQ dropping, I know I have a problem. You know? Like, when I'm flying, an LQ above 95 is essentially 100, just because there's some normal variance. And an LQ above 90 is, I don't even pay attention to it, but it's like, the needle's not quite pegged all the way at 100. But then an LQ in the 80s is like, not a problem, but I'm like, huh, okay. You know, and I don't want to see the LQ in the 80s, like, ever, unless I'm already at max power, would be my preference. I don't know. Maybe it already does that. I just usually don't run dynamic power, to be honest. Ooh, new web UI, I like it. Double telemetry bandwidth when operating in Gemini mode. Oh, so the telemetry isn't redundant. That makes total sense. That's incredibly smart. I like it. That's going to make a big difference for anybody who is doing Mavlink. Mavlink is much more packet intensive, and there's much more upstream data. So if you're doing Mavlink, if you're doing Mission Planner, if you're doing ATAC integration, the two-way Mavlink data is going to be incredible. I was flying with a guy recently, and he had a little ground station. So his ground station had a. So I've been dipping my toe more into the RG-Pilot Mavlink world, by which I mean like my toe is up to the second knuckle now instead of just the tip. Like, I'm not really in that world, but I've been playing with it a little bit. And he had a ground station, and he was running Mavlink to his iNav quadcopter, which was kind of cool. I didn't know iNav could do that. And basically all you get when you do that is you get telemetry back to the ground station. But the tablet was tracking the location of the aircraft, and he fail-safed. He fail-safed, and his aircraft crashed, landed somewhere in a field, and he lost video. But we didn't know where the aircraft was. But because he had been using the ground station, he had the exact GPS coordinates of the last known location on a map. And so we got in a car and we drove to that location, and as we got closer to the location, his radio picked up the receiver, so it was still powered up. And then, boop, the GPS updated, and we saw exactly where the quadcopter was on a map. And we're able to just go get it. And I was like, well, damn. Okay, this Mavlink telemetry thing, I could see some use for this. Go figure. wireless trainer mode coming. That's cool. Wireless pedal. I don't know what you would use that for. But there you go. DJI output. Oh! Express LRS can arm DJI air units. So you don't need the Express LR, the armor device if you have an aircraft without a flight controller. That's very slick. Shut up. GPS attached directly to the receiver? Awesome. I don't know what the hot telemetry, you have telemetry sensors, I guess, on aircraft that don't have a flight controller. I guess that's cool. A non-slot to function. They share again. There are certain cases where you start a connection, the LQ would stay very low. Sounds like a bug fix, but I never encountered the bug, so. Core code refactors, more Crossfire spec compliant, new Crossfire packet routing system. Oh. Crossfire packet routing system. That sounds very interesting if you were building a network of, like, some people will build a repeater, and the telemetry data can't go through the repeater. That's very interesting. But most people probably won't do that. Backpack disabled and Wi-Fi. Minor changes. That's very cool stuff. While I have been reading through the release notes, Blunty, anything in the Discord that we should call out, commentary or anything before we move on?
Reminder for people that if you have SPI, you're not going to be able to use SPI with this beta flight. We'll need a code change. They'll have to have some kind of update in a new beta flight version to support this. So, you might not want to run this for a while if you have SPI stuff.
Oh, because if you move your controller to 4.0, your SPI receivers can't come with it because beta flight would have to be updated. And frankly, I know the reasons why people use SPI receivers, but honestly, the downsides I think outweigh most of the upsides a lot of the time. So I try to avoid them. You can get very small flight controllers with UART based. They're just a little more expensive because you have to buy the ESP chip.
It's more about existing hardware at this point.
Yeah, no, of course.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Captain Brian, for that, and thank all the Express List devs for the work that they put in. Crispy Drip, thank you for a $5 super chat. My Meteor 75 yaws whenever I pull out of a dive. How can I fix this? What you're describing is called yaw washout. Yaw washout occurs when one of the rear motors reaches saturation. In other words, the motor's at 100% and it can't spin any faster, and then the quad skids, if you will, or washes out. This is a common thing with very small quadcopters, and basically what it means is you're flying too aggressive. You're too much for the quad. You have to dial it back. If you do big dives with tiny quads, a lot of times you get yaw washout. The answer is don't do big dives with tiny quads. One thing you can do is when you're diving, keep the throttle raised a little bit. Don't lower the throttle all the way down, and keep the quad kind of moving forward instead of falling straight down. A lot of times that'll fix it. But the answer is you need to fly around it. Could you get different motors, like higher KV motors, bigger motors, different props? Maybe. Sometimes different props will help. But a lot of times you just need to fly around it, and that's what I think pro pilots are doing. Jeffriamel says, I'm new to Express LRS. What baud rate should I be using? The TX16S and the RP 1.5 inch drone. Thank you for a $10 super chat. You should use the fastest baud rate that you can without getting errors. So the baud rate needs to be high enough to support the packet rate. The baud rate is how fast the radio talks to the module, okay? So if the packet rate goes up to a point where it hits the ceiling of the communication between the radio and the module, then you won't be able to go any faster. And in fact, the radio will detect that and will not let you, will it not let you go? Will it force a baud rate to go up? Or will it not let you select a different packet rate? I think that the radio knows when the baud rate is too low. I can't remember how that exactly works. But what you want to do is you want to set the baud rate as high as you can. Okay? I believe it's 5 megabaud is the max. And you want to look at the error counter. So there's an error counter next to the baud rate. And if the error counter is going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, counting up, then you need to lower the baud rate. Something is wrong. That's the short version. How can I wire a black box logger to the Happy Model 2 G4 flight controller? Well, let's look. So a black box logger just wires up to the UART. So let's look at this flight controller and see how many UARTs are available. A lot of times on these little AIO flight controllers, there aren't a lot of UARTs. Let me just zoom this out real quick. What we really need is wiring diagram. There's no wiring diagram. Surely there must. A Happy Model website is really frustrating. Like if you go to the support page, support manual. Oh damn it! That's not what I meant to do. Support manuals. It's just a blog style layout, chronological. So like, how do you find the actual product that you want? It's. I don't know if there's a better way to do that. So let's try this. Let's just try searching for manual. This is very frustrating. Why is the manual not linked on the damn product page? Is it? Feels like half of my, here we go, maybe this is what I want. Feels like half my live streams are complaining about websites and documentation. Boy, it does not look like there's any spare UARTs, does it? Does not look like there's any spare UARTs. Oh, how about on this side? Oh, that's better. Okay, so what do we got? Let's zoom in. We've got TX2 and RX2, that's UART2. We got TX1 and RX1, that's UART1. That's good. The receiver is built in, and it's an SPI-based receiver, so that is not going to conflict with any of your UARTs. You're good to go there. You got a receiver. Hopefully one of those two UARTs is free. Either TX2 and RX2 or TX1 and RX1. So then your black box logger is going to have a TX and an RX.
What if I told you that studying non-stop, filling sketchbooks with anatomy notes, drawing hands for 12 hours straight, or filling pages full of boxes isn't the fastest way to improve as an artist, like, at all? Despite what so many videos on YouTube might recommend? Well, you read the title of this video. From my experience teaching thousands of artists and also backed by real science, the lazy approach is actually the fastest. And I would know because I was one of those lazy students. I don't like studying. I've always refused to study anything that I don't specifically need right now. And somehow, that got me working in the game industry at 19 years old, and then shortly later Blizzard Entertainment at 22, where I actually was the youngest artist in the company at the time. And for a while I thought, I just got really lucky. But as it turns out, there's an actual name for what I was doing and what led me there. In And once I explain it, you're going to be looking back at your studies habits very differently. Let's get this class started. So here's how most artists approach learning. You sit down, you open YouTube, and you think to yourself, I should learn perspective. Or maybe I should get better at anatomy. So you watch a tutorial, and then maybe you do a couple of studies, from it. Or maybe you go overboard and you draw a whole page full of hands, to really cement the information in your brain. And then, you feel productive. Like, oh, I did something good today. Good practice. I improved, clearly. And then you move on with your day. Well, this approach has a name. In the world of learning and productivity, this is what we call JIC learning, which stands for just in case learning. You're learning something just in case you might need it one day. Make sense? Like studying hands, because one day you'll probably draw characters and their hands gonna be showing. Maybe learning 3-point perspective, because eventually in the future you probably will draw a building or something that's in 3-point perspective. So, when you get there, that's something that you might need. Or maybe you're digging deep into like color harmonies because, once you get to a point where you're happy with your drawings and maybe you want to color them in the future, well, everybody says that's something that's going to be useful, so why not do it? Just in case you need it. Well, here's the issue with JIC learning, and it's not only my opinion, it's backed by actual science. There's something called the forgetting curve, something that was discovered by a scientist named Ebbinghaus, and what he found was pretty interesting. It's basically that within 25 hours of learning something, you lose about 70% of it if you don't apply it immediately, and then wait a whole week, and it's basically all gone. That would mean that all those tutorials that you watched, all those sketchbook studies that you did, if you never use that knowledge on something real shortly after, your brain threw most of that away. And think about that for a second. Like, you can watch 50 tutorials, 50,000 tutorials in a whole month and think that you're genuinely making progress, that you're learning so much stuff. But if you don't apply that to something tangible, like something that you're working on right now, your brain basically treats it like junk mail. In the trash you go. So you spend the time, you put in the effort, and you retain almost nothing. And that is just in case learning. It feels productive, it looks productive, but it's not. Like, I made this video a couple of years ago, maybe some of you remember, where I basically drew hands for 12 hours straight, non-stop, and it kind of stuck with me how, in the end, I really didn't retain much from the experience at all. Like, despite drawing nearly 200 hands in different angles, since drawing hands wasn't something I had an urgent need to get better at, it's like it was almost all for nothing. And of course now, I understand that it turns out that might have actually been the case. So, what's the alternative? The opposite approach is called JIT learning. JIT, which stands for just in time learning. And it's exactly what it sounds like. You learn what you need, when you need it. Not a minute before. Well, maybe a minute, but you know what I mean? So here's what that might look like in practice. Like, you sit down to draw a character. Like, let's say you have something in your mind that you really want to be able to draw. Or you saw some character in some anime show or something like that, and you want to be able to draw it. Well, just try to do that until you hit a wall. Like, maybe the hands look wrong. So now, instead of having drawn hands like months prior and forgotten all about it, well, you stop right here and then you look up references for hand anatomy, hand poses, to be able to draw what you're trying to draw specifically. So you learn it, and then you immediately apply it to the drawing in front of you, and now that knowledge sticks because your brain had a real problem and you found the solution. There was context. You had a gap in your knowledge that you needed to fill before you move on with your project. And of course, there was instant reinforcement. And that's the complete opposite from learning just in case. You learned hands just in time because you needed to right now. And that's exactly what I did when I was younger, just without knowing the term. I like to draw characters with cool armors, cool weapons, stuff like that. Like, that's all I wanted to do. And I refused to study anything that didn't contribute to the piece that I was actively working on. That's not true. I didn't refuse it. I was lazy, so I just didn't do it. So, like, learning anatomy, only when something was wrong with my character and I couldn't figure out why. Learning fold and fabrics, only if I really had to. Let's say if my character's cape looked like garbage. And in color theory, only if I really had to, like if my colors looked super muddy. Looking back, that was probably the best approach I could have taken to learn, all without realizing it. I'm not bragging. But now here's the tricky part with just-in-time learning. When you hit a wall and you know that you're stuck, you don't always know exactly why you're stuck or exactly what you should be, studying to unstuck yourself. That's one disadvantage of learning this way on your own. But thankfully, I have a ton of free videos that cover a ton of different topics on this channel. But maybe that's not enough. Maybe you need someone to take your hand through all the content with the right structure, starting from simple concepts and then expanding into more complicated ones as you go, so that eventually you'll be able to draw anything your mind can imagine. Well, let me introduce the sponsor of this week's video. Me, or rather, my art school program. It's a complete art education with over 31,000 students now, and it's specifically structured so that when you hit those walls, and you will, you can identify exactly what you're missing and learn specifically that. Not a random pile of topics to memorize, but instead a carefully structured approach that focuses on fun exercises to put the theory in practice, but with an overarching personal project throughout the program to give important context to everything you'll learn. And good timing watching this because Art School is on sale now through the end of February to celebrate passing 31,000 students. So you'll be able to pick it up at a huge discount. The link is down in the video description if you want to check it out. You should. And now, let's move on. Now, let me quickly run you through the 4-step method to actually apply JIT learning like day to day. Because theory is one thing and practice is another. So the first step is to start with a real project. Not random exercises that you saw from a YouTube video, but a drawing that you actually want to finish. Or even better, a series of drawing. Can be fan art, can be original, like a scene you've had in your mind, whatever gets you excited. The motivation part here really matters because it's what will allow you to actually apply JIT learning. And it only works if you care enough about the outcome to want to power through all those hurdles that you're gonna encounter along the way. Now, in second, when you get stuck, you have to be able to narrow down what your problem is. Like figure out exactly what's blocking you and what you need to learn to be able to move past that. You might be able to find out yourself, or you might need a teacher. Either way, you gotta find out. And then in third, you solve only that problem, right? Like you find a reference, you watch a very specific tutorial on how to solve that thing that you're struggling with, or like study a specific artist that does it really well. If the problem is related to anatomy, for example, now is not the time to go down the rabbit hole of learning a bunch of different anatomy parts. Like if you're struggling with the shoulder muscle, for example, we'll learn just that. And then move on. Because in fourth, you have to apply it immediately for it to stick, like we saw before. Don't do like a separate study page. Pick the drawing. Because your brain is primed right now. It's primed to receive information because you actually need it right now. Otherwise, your character's not gonna have a shoulder. And that's it. Easy. Rinse, repeat until you finish your piece, and then just move on to the next one. You'll hit new walls, and that's fine. That's the system working. Each new wall that you run into lets you know what you should be focusing on next. Now, let's go through a real example really quickly because JIT learning is actually way more powerful than it might seem. So let's say you're drawing a character and maybe your character has a cape and the cape looks like a stiff cardboard cutout instead of, looking like real fabric. Well, that's your first wall, your first hurdle. So now you'd want to look up like how folds work specifically on like hanging fabrics, learn that, and then fix the cape, and then you can move on, and then until you hit the next wall. But here's the awesome bonus that comes with learning art this way. You know that same knowledge about hanging fabrics? Well, it also applies to scarves, flags, long hair, anything that drapes, basically. So not only did you solve one problem, but you accidentally got better at drawing a bunch of other things. And that's the beauty of just-in-time learning. When you work on real pieces, the knowledge actually overlaps in so many ways. Now, I want to be fair. Just-in-case learning isn't always useless, and that's important to understand. Like if you're a complete beginner and you've never really drawn anything, well, some baseline knowledge is actually very helpful in that case. So you need just enough knowledge to be able to draw something basic, which will then allow you to run into walls, productive walls. Kind of similar to when you're learning a new software. Let's say you're picking up Clip Studio Paint or Photoshop or something like that. Like spending an afternoon learning the software to be able to start your project is actually a good idea most of the time. That's JIT learning, but it's practical JIT. So the point isn't to never learn anything proactively. It's more that the ratio should be heavily skewed toward just-in-time learning. Way too many artists have this backwards, where they'll spend 90% of their time just preparing for stuff that might come in the future. And only maybe like 10% actually working on stuff that they care about. And then they'll wonder why they're not making any progress. The reason why just-in-time learning works best is it happens to align with how our brain actually learns through problem solving, not memorization. So just start making stuff. Get stuck, figure it out, apply the solution, and then do it over and over again and profit. So now, what's next? Well, if you want a full guide on what to do if you're just starting on your art journey, like what are the ideal first steps and in which order exactly? Well, recently I put together a full guide going over exactly that, so I'll have it right here up on the screen in just a second. I'll see you over there.
Hello everyone, today we are taking a look at the Happy Model Bass line. Yeah, bass line, not baseline, like baseball, B-A-S-E, but B-A-S, bass, like fish. And Happy Model has a habit of naming their microquads after fish of all various sorts. The Mobula is probably the most famous of fish names for their quads. And I want to start off with just one little point here. Many of you will be asking me about how does this compare to the Rocket Race. I will answer that in this video. Continue watching for that answer because it's more than just a one-liner. It comes with 1103 10,000 kV motors. The all-in-one flight controller is the X12 5-in-1, so that does include a 400 milliwatt VTX. You see my little cube antenna down there, that's Express LRS. This does come in FR Sky, Fly Sky, and without a receiver as well. And I forgot the props. They're the Gemfan Tri-Blade 2023 props. The camera is the Caddx Ant, not the light version because it's got the screw hole over there. XT30 for a battery connection. We can see here we've got a 3D printed battery mount, which I typically tear these off, but I didn't in this case. The two pieces of foam here go on either side and give us a little bit of additional battery security. In the accessory bag, I did get an extra battery tray, and I believe it is the same size. Looks the same size to me. Also in the accessory bag, a little screwdriver, and extra set of props. Extra set of that foam that goes by your battery tray. Prop remover. We've got some gummies, some extra screws, some really long screws there too, and some nylon nuts. The silver screws that came in mine are substantially longer than stock, so that's a bit curious. Also in my box is this extra canopy, which this is made for the old SD recording HD cameras, so that's a bit curious as well. Also in the box, 2 sheets of stickers. That's the Crux 3, and this is the box. But it doesn't really fit down inside with the battery tray on the bottom. And it ships without the battery tray attached, so you have to do that work yourself. It weighs just a touch under 40 1/4 grams. I flew it on this RDQ branded GNB 525 2S battery, and with that battery comes in just a touch under 70 grams. Motor post to motor post, I'm getting just about 90 millimeters. First, a slight confession. Some of you have seen part of this flight already. If you saw the HD0 goggle review, yeah, this was in there. I've also updated my flight background to reflect the fact that I am using the HD0 goggles. One of the questions I get pretty regularly after that review is, are they going to be your daily goggles? And if I'm not flying DJI, yep, they are. That's the short answer there. So if you're interested in the HD0 goggles, currently pre-order. Price could come up though. Of course, you know they had that $105 savings for pre-order, kind of trying to encourage pre-order. I mean, obviously, I think that's the sales tactic behind those. You can check out that video, or I'll put a link down in the video description to the HD0 goggles on their website. Remember, it does not come with an analog module. You have to buy that additionally. Also, it doesn't come with an analog receiver, just like most goggles outside of, well, I guess most Fat Shark goggles, because SkyZone includes them, and then the budget goggles also include them. So at any rate, back to the Bass line. I think what you'll notice some of the harder turns, especially in the sound, if you're listening closely, if you can drain out my voice out of your ears, that there is a little bit of a tune correction I think we can make. Don't get it twisted, don't get it wrong. It's not terrible. It's just not Happy Model's best tune that they've put on one of their quads. There's just I think it might be just a little bit too high at D. Of course, I didn't tinker with that. Oftentimes people will see videos 2 months later and say, did you change the tune? No, I didn't. Quite honestly, I don't revisit too many of these quads outside of an occasional flight, and definitely it's really rare that I revisit them, say, 3 to 6 months later. And retuning isn't something that I enjoy, so it's not something I do. I would rather build something else that I've kind of had my eye on, or just take one of my favorite quads out, which is the TKS Rocket Race from Jax 3D Printing. Link down in the description as well. That is my favorite 2S flyer. But this flies well. but not as well as my TKS Rocket Race 2S. But this has an advantage in the fact that it has a larger motor and a larger motor dimension. And I think, and I kind of alluded to that in my intro, I bet Happy Model has got an HD edition of this probably cooking, and it'll probably be coming out soon. So if you are flying Walksnail or DJI, or maybe that canopy's in there for O3 inclusion. I don't have O3 goggles, or the goggles too. So if that's the case, I don't know if I'll be even seeing those or not. But it was a little bit odd to get that extra canopy in there, knowing that the TKS Rocket Race really doesn't have enough room for that second layer stack. But that was the end of our flight for the most part. I found in 525 is pretty much our sweet spot for being able to get a pretty solid, at least 2.5 minutes of pretty good flight time. In this case, I got almost 3 minutes at 2 minutes and 52 seconds, and you can see there on the left, our battery is at 3.58 volts per cell. Okay, so I didn't get to it during the flight, but so a lot of people will ask me the comparison between this. This is the TKS Rocket Race. This is my favorite analog micro quad, and it's one I've got like 5 of these because I just don't want to ever be without it, because it is a lot of fun. I know it's not for most people, or it's not for some people that prefer HD. So if you want HD on yours, the best recommendation I can have to get something like this is to either buy something like the Bassline frame and stack up your HD. Probably Walksnail. I don't know how the Link or Vista would handle the extra weight. You could go naked, that would make it a whole lot better. But I've flown some of those, didn't really. I'm a performance snob. I'm looking for the performance that I like. But at any rate, I'm getting long in the tooth here already. So this is my favorite quad, and I think most people who follow the channel closely will ask me about the Bassline or Bassline and the Flywoo Nano 20. I would say these are kind of equal, and they're both about 10% off in both directions of the Rocket Race. So they're not quite there. I would say they're 90% there in one way or another. This one, in my estimation, has got a little bit too much weight, and this one, not enough motor. Speaking of the motors, the 1002 motors, they work in this configuration pretty well, but I think we need more manufacturers to make 1102 motors. Not 1002 motors. I think 0802 motors handle our 40mm props really well. 1102 motors handle bi-blades and allow us to run tri-blades really well. And you're probably asking, why do they have 1103s? Because Happy Model stopped making the 1102 motors. To my knowledge, the only current manufacturer of 1102 motors is HGLRC and their AOLIS line. And they do make an 1102 10,000 kV if you're looking to make a TKS Rocket Race. So that's an aside of the Bassline. Let's get back down to the desk and let's go over some finer points of this. Before we get down to the desk, some people are going to ask me about this quad. I've got a really long tooth video on it. The problem is getting those motors. You have to move over to the HGLRC AOLIS motors. I posted the video May 21st, 2021, and I asked just about every manufacturer that talked to me to make something like this, but nobody really has. One of my standard cautions about these is, the cube frames, which I'm not against by any stretch, so let's not get it twisted. The cube frames have a little bit more of a propensity to get stuck in our bushes and our trees. So that's something to be aware of if you're out flying your local park or something. We've got these other voids that we might not with just armed quads that can get little branches. Matter of fact, in this particular case, because they branch out into each area, we can get branches in there. So that can make it challenging if you get stuck up high. But if you're a mountain climber or arborist, maybe it's not such a big deal for you. But it's always something I think about, and I don't get stuck in trees that much, but I see a lot of people get stuck in trees online. Happy Model stepped up their game a little bit with doing some marketing on their frames. So we've got some screen printing on the frame, and that's nice to see. We've got motor protection out here, so that's really nice. I know a lot of people get concerned about bashing their motors, and that is a valid concern. So they've added the little corners out here. We've got some pretty, did I measure the thickness of the frame? I don't think I did. Oops. By the way, it looks like we've got 2mm thick carbon. If you're curious on the Rocket Race, it's 2.5mm thick. Does that mean I'm concerned about the durability? No, not really. I got a little crash reel here with sound because I'm running those HD0 goggles, and I'll include that now.
Oh, jeez. I wanged it. Nope, I'm stuck in the grass too. Oh, I almost saved it. Nope, that's not gonna work. Oh, jeez.
So yeah, I put it through its paces, my typical paces over flying it for a number of days. A lot of my testing with HD0 goggles and analog came outside with this particular quad, and that's why you saw it in that review video. You know, I don't turn over one day reviews. I don't go fly something for an afternoon and call it good and fetch out some sort of footage that I can post. I want to fly and get a feel for it so I can give you my best possible experience with it. So the frame, as you can already see, is fully intact, even with those whacks that it did take. One note that I didn't pull off in the beginning, I added this zip tie relief to the battery lead. That's something that I wish Happy Model would do. I even noted that they typically include, don't they include normally two zip ties, two small zip ties in their accessory bag, but I didn't see it in this one. So in this particular case, I highly recommend give yourself a little wiggle in your battery lead wires and then zip it down to one of these arms with a small zip tie. That can help potentially save any sort of battery slippage. Although I will say, this battery mount, it did work out very well. One, I didn't rip it off. I've ripped off a number of these 3D printed battery trays that are bottom mounted a number of times over the years. It is obviously pretty tight, getting this 525 in there. 450s also work. My favorite Nanotech 45 to 90C, which C rating is mumbo jumbo, but it's a good way you can identify the battery. It does fit in here nice as well, but this doesn't have the efficiency of the Rocket Race, so I had to go to a much larger battery, and hence the weight that is the difference between how those two fly. But this is the size of battery I would recommend if you're asking me, or if you got 450s on hand, they'll be fine too. It is kind of interesting that we've got two down screws and then two up screws, and you may have noticed here before we cut away to watch the crash reel that this nylon nut has come up on this screw, so that's one of those things that you're going to have to check on a regular basis to make sure your screw or your nuts aren't coming up off the quad or the canopy or the screw where you end up with some sort of component flyaway or getting into prop and then you end up in a bad crash or in a bad situation up in a tree. And then down here in the bottom, we've got we've got our nuts on those two sides, and then we've got our Phillips screws. The motors take Phillips screws down here. We haven't seen hex heads, although I did buy some off of eBay. They didn't work out very well. They're mismachined, I think. But they also have a little bit of a design factor here when it comes to the frame. Instead of it just being a random, typical cube shape that's all straight, we highlighted the motor mounting. And also, if you're looking at building this frame up, 1104s, I'm a little bit concerned about the 2mm thick frame with if you put 9x9 mounting and 1104s on that, because that really jumps the weight up a little bit. You get more weight out on the end. Maybe it's going to be fine. It's relatively thick, especially in this center section, and these are just kind of cross brace sections, so it could be fine. But time will tell as people decide to go with, if they choose to go with this frame and build it out. Just one of those things. I guess I throw out a lot more caution about certain things that I see rather than telling you to do it or to not do it or it'll be safe. I can't say it this time, so it's a concern for me. The USB-C is off the carbon fiber. That's one of those things is your canopy gets hit when you take previous tumbles, like I showed you in that video. If the USB is too close to the carbon, it'll bonk, 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 and then one day it just falls off, and then you've got no USB access, and that's bad. Always check your screws before the flights. Make sure the motors are nice and solid down there. Make sure that the bell hasn't slipped down or the motors haven't wiggled their screws loose. You know, do your pre-flight checks as you always should. I don't mention that enough, but it's one of the things that can catch us out in this hobby is we don't do our pre-flight checks. Even little things like making sure your camera connector's in there. Obviously, if you were fly this FPV, you put your goggles on and goes, "Where's my camera?" Well, then the connectors come loose. But that's pretty rare, but it can happen. VTX is over here on the UFL, which is a nice thing. That means if you need to change out your antenna for any particular reason, maybe you fly with others and you don't want to blow them out of the air or cause them any sort of signal difficulties, or you're in a high multipath like metal building or something like that, going with a circular polarized antenna will probably help in those situations, and you can just get another one with the UFL. We've got a screw with our Caddx camera on each side, so you can adjust your camera angle full up and down, but there's essentially no camera protection. There's only camera protection from the sides. So full on, dead on, you're gonna smack the camera, you're gonna break the lens, and need a new camera. Thankfully, the Caddx Ant cameras, aren't those around $15? Or did they jump in price recently? I'll need to look that up, but it's a very good light nano camera, especially if you don't like the Runcam Nano 3. Press-on props, should call that out as well, press-on props, but 1103 motors and these props do have the ability to take screws. So one of the things that I find that can happen even on my TPS Rocket Race with 1102s is that the shaft will get loose, and then you've got to screw the prop down into the bell top or the bell housing in order to keep that motor operating. So if you end up with a motor that just doesn't really spin, or maybe it twitches, maybe it looks like it's failed, check to make sure that when you turn the prop that this down here turns, and if it doesn't turn, that means it's probably slipping on the prop shaft. So use some prop screws, probably, what are they, 5mm screws, and screw those down to the bell, and you'll be off to the races again. Of course, don't just do that to one motor. I suspect that could throw our balance off and cause Betaflight to freak out. I haven't done that myself. When I've added screws to one motor, I go ahead and do it to all three. You guys tell me, if you add motor screws to one motor, what happens? Does Betaflight just compensate for it? Because Betaflight's really good at compensating for stuff nowadays. Tell me down in the comment section below, please. I'm curious about that. Got motor connectors for easier swapping. If you want to go higher performance, one of the things that high performance people tend to do is remove the connectors and solder the wires. Gives you a little bit more electrical throughput to the motors, especially if you have had several connections in and out with those connectors. They might wear down like our PH20 connectors too. As I said in the beginning, this does come with FR Sky. This also comes in Express LRS. Fly Sky is also an option on this particular board, or you can get it without a receiver and you can add your own. Maybe you like Crossfire, maybe you like the SMX or Spectrum. You can do that on here as well too. To all those that follow the channel so closely, I appreciate it, but this is still my favorite. Both of these are 90% of the way there, but none of them are quite where this one is. The Bassline does come with those different options as far as the receiver goes. I didn't mention it initially in the quick specs, but the 400 milliwatt VTX is OpenTX, so that has some additional features that we don't find in many of our other analog VTXs. We've got basically the same lead developer that we have for Express LRS doing OpenTX as well. I see on the Banggood website, which is the only website I was able to find this on outside of AliExpress, which AliExpress might be a better option because of pricing. Oftentimes AliExpress Marketplace, they're competing for price. Banggood listed at $125.99. That's about what you kind of expect nowadays. You know, we used to expect this quad for $98. Then it was $110. Well, now we're at $125.99. I'll look on AliExpress and hopefully I can find one maybe closer to $115. Maybe. If you're interested in this, I'll have links down in the video description below. If you have any comments, questions, I already posed a few questions already, or suggestions about the Bassline from Happy Model, please let me know in the comment section below. I appreciate your time. And thanks for watching.
I've been motivated to draw all day long. Let's do this.
1 minute later.
That's not just me, right? Like, you stare at a blank page, you know you should be drawing, but you just can't start. Your motivation is just like gone like this. Well, don't worry about that anymore, because today we're gonna break down the science of motivation, and I'll even provide like some proven techniques to never run out of creative energy again. And this is not just like what I think is good. It's actually backed by neuroscience and psychology. I'm Mark. I used to work for Blizzard Entertainment, and now I teach art for a living. And even after like literal decades of working as a professional artist, I've always been struggling with motivation. So I'm sure some of you do as well. And in this teaching act of my career, I've been really interested in knowing how this whole thing works. Like why I can just sit down and focus on my work instead of checking my phone all the time. Just trying to find any way to like harness my motivation and focus it in the right direction. And well, now I've got answers. And a little bit later, I'll even share the one technique that's worked the best for me, one that's completely transformed my art practice. So let's dig into it. Let's get into your brain first. Scientists have discovered 3 major motivation killers that stop people from pursuing their goals. And then once you recognize these in yourself, you can actually rewire your thinking and see immediate results. It's helped me a ton. Nothing kills creativity faster than feeling forced. So when drawing becomes something that you have to do, your brain automatically creates resistance. This used to happen to me all the time with commissions, for example. The moment it becomes work, my motivation just plummets. I would have all the motivation for my own personal art, but as soon as that work was meant for someone else, it felt like the biggest chore ever. Like, I'd rather die than do it. And the solution here is to change the I have to part into I choose to. And these aren't just, word games, it's psychology. Like, you don't have to draw anatomy today. You choose to because you want to level up your character designs, maybe. You see the difference? I would choose to work on my commissions because that was, for me, the best way to get better and eventually be able to charge more money for my work. But if it were a piece where
The TX16 Mark III doesn't seem to have side sliders. WTF? This is one of the TX15's.
Don't you just hate the winter? You're stuck inside from the snow. You're depleted of energy.
Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm Andy RC and today I'm going to be taking a look at the Happy Model Mobula 7 HD.
Some KV motors, 40mm quad blade props, Caddx Turtle for HD recording and your FPV, Crazy Bee F4 version 2 with 5 amp ESCs, a power switchable VTX up to 200 milliwatt via smart audio. Underneath the canopy is a single multicolor LED, XT30 for your battery connection. It weighs just a touch over 46 grams. Motor post to motor post, I'm getting 75 millimeters. These batteries all fit the battery tray. These don't. Mine came with 2 batteries, a 2S and a 3S, both 300 milliamp. It did come with this canopy, but I don't think you'll see it in production. We get a screwdriver, a prop remover, 2 foam pads for the battery tray, and a few extra screws. I won't be saying much during this portion of the flight footage. Just enjoy the audio that we have on board from that Caddx Turtle. We have so much flight footage, I can't think I can talk through it all. So we'll just watch this, and then when we get to some talking points and some flight footage, we'll do that. Now that we're finishing up the whizzy around indoor flight, we're going to move into a slow cruising flight outdoors. And I want to send a thank you out to License to Drive. He pointed out in my last video, the iFlight video with HD footage, that something seemed off with the footage. And sure enough, there was. It didn't compare anything to my source. I did that quad an injustice by not having my rendering and file project settings all set up properly. So I did a host of testing on what I needed to change. And I will say that even in the footage you're going to see in this video, it's not as good as my source, but I'm unsure what is left that I can change to help that. You'll notice a little bit of jello. Unfortunately, my weather, I spent the first week of having this quad beating this thing up in the house and flying it around and having a good time, to the point where I've only got 4 props left that won't even fly anymore. They'll stay on the hubs or they have all their blades. The props tend to loosen up as you bang because the flexible frame does bang into the props, and then it shifts the hub around on the motor shaft, kind of reaming themselves out, and then next thing you know, it won't stay on anymore. I couldn't tell you how many times I would start to take off after a crash, and I would hear a ping, ding, 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 ding across the floor, and I'd lost another prop, and it just wouldn't stay on anymore. And speaking of props, if you're thinking about flying the old red props from the Mobula 7 and possibly others, these are drilled true because the motor stem is a bit longer. So even though you'll be able to get them on, you won't be able to get them on all the way without drilling them out. There is a bit of a variable to that, but we'll talk more about that at the desk. Something else you may notice on the right-hand side of the footage in the top left and bottom right corners, there's a bit of a line aberration. I think I damaged the camera a little bit, and I think it's a cable, and I'll also show you that at the desk. I went back and compared some of my earlier flights, and that was not there. If you go back and watch the flight footage of the full flight inside where I'm whizzing around, you'll notice that it's there, but it's not as predominant as this. So I think over time in crashes, I damaged that cable. It looks to me like it's pulled one wire out a little bit. Maybe it's completely disconnected, but the camera still works. In this flight, I am using a Race Day Quads 2S 525 milliamp battery, and it handles it just fine. I don't think you'd want to use that battery if you're wanting to do acro flights in close proximity, or if you're not very comfortable with flying maybe earlier on. I would suggest a lighter battery, because a lighter battery is going to help you maneuver to avoid those big crashes, and carrying the extra weight of a bigger battery is also going to increase the probability that you may have more substantial damage when you do crash. You know, when you have mass moving, the more mass you have, when it stops suddenly, the more possible damage that you have. And overall, even with my beat up props and a canopy that's not very snug anymore, it's kind of been reamed out around the screws, I thought the jello wasn't very bad, but maybe I'm being too forgiving. You should take a close look at that yourself. I'm not going to be the judge of that because, as you guys know, that around the channel for a long time, I don't feel I'm really discerning about that. But I also want to talk for a minute about Nathan Loops. He is a team pilot for Happy Model, and he has got some amazing flight footage of flying some really cool places. He does all the things I don't do. He flies in cool spots, he changes spots a lot, and he does all those cool acrobatic moves. And I'm going to link his channel down below. I highly recommend you check out his channel to really see the full capabilities of what this machine is like in the air. Because he has skills that I don't have, and I would suggest that you look into it. Next up as we finish is going to be 3 minutes and 40 seconds of dives. So this was one of my primary focuses in when I was tuning. I was trying to figure out how we could solve that prop wash. And if you've got a trash can frame, you might want to try going props in the traditional way where the high side of the props rotate in towards the front and in towards the rear, because I found that that combination and the PIDs that I used, that I didn't have any prop wash, and that's why I've included so many dives. We might go blind watching all these dives. I did a whole bunch of dives. I did dives that were ugly, dives that were just poor pilot skill. I did crash a few times, as you've already seen one, but we'll see a couple more. There's a couple of them that I would call, well, Flight Test actually called them butt bombs, where you come in and you pull up so hard, it's almost as though you're going straight down and your tail hits. I think that was quite a while ago when they said that on Flight Test's channel or in a video, and it stuck in my mind for whatever reason. And you'll see a few times where I daringly pull out of that brush that I'm flying towards each and every time. I think it's fairly entertaining. That's why I've included so much. And it's a proof of concept, because I know that, you know, when you're doing videos like this, the proof is in the pudding. If I do 2 or 3 dives and say, hey, no washout, then it's not all that believable. But I don't know how many I'm showing you here, but I've cut out a good majority of the bits between the dives. But from time to time, I do leave the turn as I go back into the next approach for a dive. And I do that so that you know that I'm trying to show you as much as I can, but I'm also trying to keep it brief. If I were to show you all the full flights, we would have quite a bit of footage to watch. I should also mention that that inside flight was not on a GNB battery, that was on a Hobby King battery, and we'll talk more about those Hobby King Nanotechs when we get back to the desk. I don't want to recommend those, but I do want to disclose that I was using those in the inside flight. So if you're listening closely to the audio, not my voice, you may hear prop wash, but not wash out. If you're not familiar, for whatever reason, of washout or yaw washout, it's where the machine will suddenly pitch up and it will spin, usually to the right, in my experience, and it will spin suddenly, and you have no control over that. At no point in time during any of these dives did I feel I wasn't in control. At the very least, control up to the point where I am flying very well. You know, I got pretty sloppy a number of times, and it was windy. There was a bit of wind too, so that was another factor I was really wanting to test, was what happens if we have some wind. Now, I'd like to tell you that there's no washout whatsoever, but I can't, because the fact of the matter is, as soon as these things get in the wild and we fly in a bunch of different locations with a bunch of different pilots, wind direction, battery size, all these different variables that come out when more people have the chance to fly one, that somebody might find that there is a washout in a particular scenario. But I do think that all this flight footage does help you at least have some peace of mind, in that you shouldn't suffer a washout very often if you do suffer from it at all. I am testing various batteries in these dives, everything from those Hobby King Nanotechs to the G&B 300s, the Race Day Quad 300s. I also threw the G&B 3S 300 milliamp batteries. Those are pretty new. And I also went with the 525 a few times. Early in this dive section, you saw that one where I just dove straight into the ground. I believe that was a 525, and the old pilot didn't pull out nearly in time. That was something else I wanted to be thorough about, was testing these dives. I sure hope I've provided enough video footage to where you can make a good decision about whether this is a machine for you. If I haven't, again, I want to encourage you to go over to Nathan's channel and cruise through his footage. I do believe he does a pretty good job of making sure in the description of the video what he is flying, because he does fly a series of micros, and I like that as well. So there's a few things I want to show you about the machine now in its state. And I should disclose that on average, I had at least 11 flights and as many as 24 flights in any particular day. I kept 8 days of flight footage, and if I recall correctly, I deleted about 4 days of flight. That was pretty early on flight footage where I was working on the tune inside, because our weather has been so bad. But I'll put the PIDs that I used on screen. You may find the PIDs that come stock on this are slightly different. Nathan Loops, as I've mentioned before, he's the team pilot, and he also had a tune, and our numbers were actually fairly same, so fairly close. So I would give myself a pat on the back for coming out with some fairly decent PIDs. But as you can see on my props, they're now rotating in. It came stock, rotating in towards the sides. So the high side of the prop should lead the way. As you can see, this is the high side. It would rotate in here and here, and then rotate in towards the tail. My canopy moves around a little bit. Again, all these crashes, if I get the camera to focus and the angle just right, you'll probably see that I've got some movement there. And they are working on a different canopy and mounting system, so what you'll find is going to be slightly different than this, but I don't think it'll be dramatic. I don't think you'll see, as I mentioned in the quick roll, I don't think you'll see this one, because it does have a little bit too much movement. That gap in here, I think, is pretty important to the stability of the camera. They are also working on, maybe instead of making this recessed, making this an area where you can put a rubber grommet in order to help isolate the vibration getting into the camera, and I think that's a suggestion I would make. You might see a little bit adhesive around these. I actually tried that, but it didn't make any difference in my footage, so I pulled it back off. So that's, you know, just going to mention it just a bit there. I would take it all apart and look at it, but I'll tell you what, when I change canopies, This is a challenge to work on. Don't kid yourself. This is going to be a super micro, and we've got a lot of components stacked up here in the canopy, and our wires are all fairly short, and they've done all those things, in my belief, to keep the weight down. I think the power to weight ratio, which is what makes the Mobula 7 so great of a flight performer, is key. And in this case, we've added a board, we've added a camera. Those things add up. We might have 8 to 10 grams more than we would otherwise. The V3 frame here weighs a little bit more as well. And then the Mobula came with thinner gauge wire and 2 PH20 connectors, and we have an XT60. So those things add weight, but yet they've been able to keep the weight down. I think this weighs in either less or the same than the Beta FPV 75X, one of the first brushless whoops that we saw came out. Let's take a look at the flight controller. So as you can see there, it's a Crazy Bee F4. FR stands for the protocol, so that's FR Sky. And then we have that V2 up there. Also, we have bind and boot buttons that are bigger now. Look at that. Look at the size of those buttons. You can press those with your fingers. You don't even need a tool or anything. Just press them with your fingers. And as you can see, that's on the bottom side of the board. And you can see over here on this side where it has the word boot. Let me turn it over so it's right side up. So right above my thumb, you should see the word boot. And that would make this one the bind. And then we have our pads laid out there on the silk screening of the board. And if you want to get a closer look at the board, here is the other side. We got our arrow there, that's universal on flight controllers. That tells us which way is forward. We don't have to mount it that way, but if we don't, then we have to tell Betaflight which way the board is oriented. One thing the eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed is this Caddx Turtle board that we're kind of rotating around does not have the traditional connector on it. I believe they removed that for space savings. This is only going to be the case in the review samples. They have confirmed that while the connector won't be there, they will solder on the pigtail that you need for the OSD control for the camera, so you can change various settings to the recording, whether it starts. One of my preferences to be start recording when we power it on rather than having to touch the button. That'd be one less thing to do, but maybe that's a good thing that we have to press the button, so then when we're done with the flight, we know we have to press the button again. If we look at this board that I have here over the side, this is the connector I speak of, and it's got another connector that typically comes with it, and then you plug in the control board to that little connector where the dongle hangs off of it, so that you can then manipulate the camera. As we see here, this is the Armor 85. A review will be coming out on that whenever the weather clears. It's got the dongle right here, and you can see the connector right there. This does not have that, so they are going to solder the little lead that comes off this piece here right to the board, so that should not be a problem for the retail samples that come out that are purchased. I wanted to take a moment to look at the motors, because I do think that those are worth a little bit of attention themselves. Kind of like the style. It's kind of got that chrome and red look. I'd like it more if it were chrome and blue, but you know, chrome and red isn't bad. Oh, I've got screws all stuck to it. Hold on a second. You can see there, got the Happy model on there. And these wires are silicone. I know that's not going to come through in video very well, but they're nice and silicone and a little bit more substantial than we're used to. And also we've got some adhesive or glue, it looks like, on there, that shiny bit near the end. So those things should help the motor wires stay intact. Now let's weigh one of these up, because I think this is pretty light. On my scale, it comes in at 2.69, 2.7 grams. I only bring up the weight in the motor because I'm hoping Happy Model will release another style of this motor with some longer wires so that we can maybe build some ultralights on 2S. I think that's going to be the next exploration. 2S really hasn't gotten his day. It's gotten 2S in the Whoop area, but we haven't seen a lot of exploration on 2S in our quads or traditional quads that don't have prop guards, running different props. Kebab's been exploring that a little bit, and so I'm wondering how viable this motor might be to flying. If you're wondering about this little nubbin over here, that's a wire, that's not a screw. It's kind of misaligned, isn't it? I probably just need to snip off. That's probably just insulation from the wire. So nothing for me to worry about, at least. I would just plug it in and fly it as it is, but I might clean it up a bit too. But that's a look at the motor. So a few other things about the quad. You'll notice on this one there's this Happy Model sticker under here. And also you'll notice you have these brackets underneath the canopy. This canopy has the same brackets in the little screw hole here, but this one does not have the sticker. And with the LED that's mounted underneath here, it actually pulses, and you can see it kind of pulsing through in the Happy Model logo. If you're not familiar with that, it's kind of a cool little interesting touch. Something that I thought I would bring to your attention. The button for starting and stopping recordings is actually available. It's on there. I can reach it with my pinky when I don't have a camera stuck between me and my quad. So I was using my pinky, or I was using my paintbrush that I oftentimes use for touching components on the boards. I don't like using metal because I'm always worried I'm going to touch something, I'm going to slip off the button and short something out, because of course you're pressing that button to start your recording when the machine's powered on, and then you get a little red blinking light that comes in right down here, and it's easy to see, so that flashes and you know you're recording. You put down your goggles, you get an indication as you see on screen that you're recording, and you also get that white box in the top right. And you may find with this model that you want to move some of your OSD elements. I put mine, as you see there on screen, in the normal locations, and it tends to get washed out, that information, by the recording indicators. We've got that red running time, and then we've got the REC in the white box. Also, that is the view that you see in the goggles. It is not the footage I've shown you. The footage I've shown you is recorded on the SD card. I also encourage you, if you get one of these, or really anything like the Caddx Turtle or the Runcan Split or the Foxeer Mix, you're going to need a pretty good SD card. I'll show you mine here real quick. This is the SD card I've been using, and unfortunately a little bit of that information is hard to see. This is a Class 10 high-speed card. You can obviously see where it says SanDisk Ultra Plus. It's a 16 gig, and so you can see I've had it in and out of many machines. I'm not necessarily recommending this card. I'm just trying to let you know, if you put a lower class card in, a lot of the cards that we get with stuff that are free cards, you know, you buy a camera or something and you get a card, those won't have good recordings on it. You'll probably find that it's jittery or stuttery when you record on a lower class card. So something to keep in mind, the quad does not come with this card. Something else the quad won't come with is probably a 3S battery. I suspect you're only going to get a 2S battery. Now, as for those aberrations that we saw on screen, I think it's because this is really hard for me to see on camera. I'm trying to use the viewfinder on the camera. If you can see right kind of below my little pointer there, that little shiny bit, when I put that under my magnifying glass, that looks like a wire, a silver wire. And I'm thinking that it's this last wire that started to come out of the connector, and I suspect that is from when I switched canopies. I probably leaked, and instead of popping those off, I ended up pulling one wire out, and I think that's what the aberration that we saw on the right-hand side of my video recordings is. A little bit unfortunate for me, and I would probably just get a new cable if those are available. I'll have to go looking for those, but those cables just pop on and pop off. Also notice that the camera back has been removed to save weight. Normally this isn't exposed. As you see it down here, there's another plate they put on and a couple little screws to secure that plate. So you may want to try to get some adhesive in there if you're concerned about it. So if you get tangled up in a tree, that's the scenario I think that would happen, where you might get a wire in there. But otherwise, it's pretty well tucked away, and the way it's built, the wires really aren't hanging out. They're free to get tangled up in a tree. I think the only thing you want to do is keep track of this wire set. Hopefully you can see that down in there. That wire set, you may have to push that back more towards center every once in a while. Again, I use something blunt so I don't damage those wires. And while we're there, note that these props spin right underneath the camera, so you need to get them fully seated so they do not hit the camera. A couple of times I did not get the props all the way down, and I'd hit the arm switch and I'd hear, and that's not a good sign. It didn't sure help out my props either. Speaking of props, you do get an extra set. I failed to mention that in a quick roll. So you get a set on the quad, then you get another set, and mine are fairly damaged. This one's actually not bad. This one probably doesn't stay on the motor anymore. It flies off, but I did break, I thought I broke 3 or 4. Here's 2. I broke those 2. I should have had this lined up. This one's pretty haggard. You know, that one's not really, you can see where it's, I think this would probably hit the camera quite a bit. That chip, I think, kind of lines up. I bet you that was up front. I got another prop over here. This one actually looks pretty good too. It probably got reamed out of the hub and wouldn't stay on the motor anymore. So you will need extra props. I did try the HQ props on it, and I didn't find that it helped with jello, because that was really the main reason why I was trying it. And so I use these HQ props. I've had these around, and I broke one, and I thought that was some information about, might be of use about the HQ prop. It sheared off in this manner. I hit something, of course the frame flexed, and the prop snapped. I've got a set of TBS props on the version 2 Mobula frame, and these props fit fine on this frame, but they don't fit fine on this frame. Also, the gem fans are the same way. I had to trim these down in order for them to clear the props. You can probably see in the back side here, there's some scratch marks. That's because the prop was spinning kind of and striking the hoop. So I had to trim those off ever so slightly, probably just a millimeter, maybe 2 at most, in order to get those to clear. But because we're flying in HD, I didn't want to risk having unbalanced props, so I did not try these. Now, the only 3S footage I had was actually included in those dives, and hopefully you can hear it. It has a different pitch to it. Quite frankly, with the 3S, I don't see it as viable for the masses. I think most people are going to fly 2S because it flies very well on 2S, and 3S flight times are shorter. You're carrying extra weight, and it doesn't actually provide you more flight time. I think if you're a pilot like Nathan, you're going to want that extra punch, and it's not dramatic. I don't want to over or understate it. Sometimes I feel like I do both. I'll understate something, and then I'll overstate other things another time. In my opinion, flying on 3S isn't a huge jump. It's not like going from a brush to a brushless or anything like that. It's much more subtle, and it's more, you can tell more in the low range of the throttle. For quick hits, quick little pumps, if you're gonna do a punch out, you feel it right at the first 50% of the throttle, but I would say the rest of the throttle is very comparable to 2S. And in many of those dives, the climbs, I'm not even going full throttle because I'm actually trying to save battery so I can do more dives. So that makes it a little bit difficult to judge. That's a flaw of my review. Unfortunately, I don't have a 3S flight to show you. As of this recording tonight, the kids have no school tomorrow because of a planned snow day. They're predicting somewhere around 5 inches of snow for us, and then they're predicting 3 to 4 more days of snow. And I don't have any idea when that will go away. And I don't tend to try to take risks when it comes to providing a review. I want to be able to fly it like I want to fly it. I don't really want to fly it cautiously. So you get a real feel for what it's like flying in my space with me at the sticks. I do plan to work on some 3S PIDs. If you're interested in that, you might want to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell that YouTube provides so you can come back. I'll work on some 3S PIDs and I'll show you a 3S flight. If you're not interested in 3S, just let me know. I think I should create a poll. Let's do that. I'll create a poll right up here. You let me know. On a 40mm prop, are you interested in 3S if it's shorter flight time? Or are you just going to stick with 2S? I'm very curious because I hear a lot about flight time. Whenever I have a short flight, even with me whizzing around, whenever the flight time is short, that's something I hear about. Oh, it's a shame. Looks like a nice model. Too bad the flight time's so short. So I know that that matters to a section of you, but I don't know how big that section is. So if you would take a moment to click that poll up there, it should just be a yes or no or a 2S, 3S sort of thing. I'll work something out. Make your selection so I can get a better feel for the people who come to this channel and what you're looking for in a hoop that's running 40mm props. These are all the batteries that I had out earlier to kind of show you what I was using. Unfortunately, actually, these two I wasn't using because they don't fit. So those two are out. But all these others, they fit just fine. I should get a GNB one of this out. Oh, I have one right here. So this was one that Happy Model made and they sent with the review kit. You probably won't get this battery. If you want 3S, this one does fit. It looks almost identical to the GNB, so I kind of have my suspicions it's a GNB battery as well. It just didn't have the label on it. Race Day Quads, this is one I used in the cruising flight. It fits in just fine. You might find that a bit surprising that a 525 milliamp battery fits in fine. So I'll show you. See, fits just fine. We've got 350s from GNB and Race Day Quads. Again, very, very similar. We talked about this in the 3S or Power Whoop flight or battery video that I did. You can go and watch that. I'll put that video in the link. Basically, the gist of it is that this is definitely a GNB battery. We've got a 300 from Race Day Quads. I should kind of categorize these a little bit so you guys can get a better look. But then this is kind of the unicorn, or not necessarily the unicorn, but this is the one that I used inside. And I use this inside because it is lighter. It is substantially lighter than these other batteries, specifically the 300 milliamp batteries. But there's some downsides to this battery. So I used it, and I used it because I have it. If I didn't have a channel, I don't think I would have these batteries.
because there is a section of the world where you may have to buy Hobby King batteries, and I get that. That stinks, but that's, you're limited because of maybe shipping reasons or location. Maybe Hobby King has a warehouse in your area and there's no other hobby shops that'll ship a battery to you, or it's cost prohibitive, what the case is. But unfortunately with these batteries, I don't have a good history with them, so that's a bias of mine. 2 years ago I had a bunch of Nanotechs and I didn't find them reliable. I also found that after a certain number of flights that the flight time went way down, the performance went way down. When they're relatively fresh and new, they do perform on par with these other batteries of equal size, but they are lighter, and there's a propensity to get dead cells right out of the box. So before you even first charge, you plug it into a cell checker and all of a sudden you've got a dead cell. Now it could just be a wiring mishap in there, but anyways, it happens enough to where it's been reported by others than me that I want to give you some caution when it comes to buying these batteries. You can find these on sale. Hobby King does sales like most places do, and I would suggest picking them up when they're on sale, or maybe doing a group